Silence is not an option. There are growing calls. There's apparently a substantial and growing, although this story is like absolutely not being reported at all by the corporate media. At all. Unless you've seen something I haven't. I mean, you know, call and let me know if you have. I'd love to hear it. But as far as I know, nobody is reporting the fact that the Trump campaign has sucked up all of the parade and protest permits for several days around the nomination, or excuse me, around the inauguration, so that there will be no visible. I mean, this guy is so media savvy, and the people who are, you know, running the the incoming Trump administration and the Trump transition team, which is basically, you know, Mike Pence and Corey Lewandowski and these guys. I mean, keep in mind, Corey Lewandowski, who started the Trump campaign, used to work where? Americans for Prosperity, which is funded by who? The Koch brothers. And, you know, the Koch brothers and friends would like an administration that is friendly to fossil fuels. Well, that's what we've got. That is filled with climate deniers. Well, that's what we've got. That is hostile to labor. Well, that's what we've got. That is hostile to workplace regulations and environmental protections. Well, that's what we've got, or that's what we're getting, I should say. So hundreds of thousands of people are planning on coming to Washington, D.C. to protest the Trump. It's so hard to say, the Trump presidency. My God. And there's like no discussion of it. This is going to make for a you know, either really interesting or a real mess or something. I mean, it's just, you know, January 21st, the you know, the Million Woman March. They got no permits now because the Trumps trumped them. And then we've got this, you know, guy Ryan Zinke, you know, Trump is going to put in charge of Interior. This is maybe another James Watt. I keep saying I'm getting echoes of Reagan all over again, only on steroids. I mean, this is Reagan fueled by the Koch brothers. Now, of course, Reagan himself was fueled by right-wing billionaires, you know, the Scaifes and the Mellons, and I don't know about the Mellons, the Richard Mellon Scaife. Well, yeah, he's part of the Mellon family, and Joe Coors and his buddies, and you know, I'm assuming the Kochs were politically active at that time. But now it's, I mean, you know, it's just reached a whole nother level. For example, did you know that we have a radio, television, and internet broadcasting service in the out of the United States? Nobody in the United States can hear it or see it by law. But it goes to over 150 countries around the world, and over 150 million people regularly listen to it. And it's the Voice of America, you know, Radio Free Europe. These are two separate entities, by the way, but it's these, you know, and these are governed by the Broadcasting Board of Governors, which, you know, it was always like this opaque thing to me. I was like, you know, what the heck is that? Until I got to know Blanquita Cullum. Blanquita is she's a conservative talk show host. She's an old friend of Ellen Ratner's. In fact, they were roommates for a while, and Ellen introduced me to Blanquita many years ago. And Blanquita's, you know, actually, our politics are completely different, but she's a really decent person. And she was on the Broadcasting Board of Governors. And they would stock it basically with both Republicans and Democrats, roughly even, and the terms were longer than a presidential term, so that no president could like put his imprint on the Broadcasting Board of Governors. The whole point was to keep it completely independent of politics, so that the Voice of America and Radio Free Europe were actually even reflecting dissent within the United States. You know, were examples of a free press. Well, the Trumpsters have put into, or the Republicans, let's say, have put into the military funding bill, the Defense Authorization Act, a line item that essentially says no more Broadcasting Board of Governors. From now on, the president can appoint basically a czar who oversees this taxpayer-funded international what will now become apparently a Trump propaganda machine. You think it might be Steve Bannon or one of his friends? Has Breitbart just taken over Voice of America, or is it about to? It's increasingly looking that way. In fact, the headline by Michael Rosenblum, who's the founder of Current TV and past president of New York Times TV, a guy who knows this industry, the headline over at Huffington Post is titled, "Did the GOP just hand Breitbart, a global media company that you paid for?" And the answer is, yeah, apparently. Or it's sure looking that way. And which takes us to this whole issue of, who really owns our government? Who owns our public discourse? George Monbiot over at The Guardian, which has basically become my go-to newspaper. I love their app on my phone, and it's their reporting and their op-eds are just as solid as anything. It used to be the New York Times. I would always read the New York Times first. Now I'm reading The Guardian first before anything else. And George Monbiot writes in yesterday's Guardian, he says, "I have watched as tobacco, coal, oil, chemicals, and biotech companies," and frankly, I would add internet or tech, whatever you want to call that, have poured billions of dollars into an international misinformation machine composed of think tanks, bloggers, and fake citizens groups. Now the people who help run this machine are shaping the government, our government, the government of the United States. He writes, this is George Monbiot in yesterday's Guardian, theguardian.com. Charles and David Koch, who for years have funded extreme pro-corporate politics, might not have been enthusiasts for Trump's candidacy, but their people were all over his campaign. Until June, Trump's campaign manager was Corey Lewandowski, who, like other members of Trump's team, came from a group called Americans for Prosperity. AFP purports to be a grassroots campaign, but it was founded and funded by the Koch brothers. It set up the first Tea Party Facebook page, organized the first Tea Party events. With a budget of hundreds of millions of dollars, AFP has campaigned ferociously on issues that coincide with the Koch brothers' commercial interests in oil, gas, minerals, timber, and chemicals, writes George Monbiot. In Michigan, it helped force through a right-to-work bill. I call them right to work for less, in pursuit of what American for Prosperity's local director called, quote, taking out the unions at the knees. It has campaigned nationwide against action on climate change. It has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into unseating politicians who won't do its bidding and replacing them with those who will, writes George Monbiot. He says, I could fill this newspaper with the names of Trump staffers who have emerged from such groups. Doug Dominick from the Texas Public Policy Foundation, funded, among others, by the Koch brothers, Exxon, and the Donors Trust. Barry Bennett, whose Alliance for America's Future, now called One Nation, refused to disclose its donors when challenged. And Thomas Pyle, president of the American Energy Alliance, funded by Exxon and others. He says, in terms of Trump's promise to drain the swamp, he says, it looks like the only swamps he'll drain will be real ones as his team launches a war on the natural world. He said, understandably, there's plenty of coverage of racists and white supremacists, but gruesome as they're peripheral to what his politics team is going to develop. It's almost comforting, though, George Monbiot writes, to focus on them, for at least we know who they are and what they stand for. By contrast, to penetrate the corporate misinformation machine is to enter a world of mirrors. And he is so right. I mean, I have been debating these people for years and years and years, and they're really good, and they're really well-funded. And they're willing to go anywhere and say not say anything, but promote their point of view, including even into the den of the lion, right? Onto this program. And I've pretty much stopped in the last couple of years, stopped even debating these guys on climate change, but they're all over everywhere else. He said the fake news we should be worried about is not stories invented by Macedonian teenagers about Hillary Clinton and pizza joints or selling arms to Islamic State, but the constant feed of confected scares about unions, tax, and regulation drummed up by groups that won't reveal their interests. And George Monbiot correctly points out, you cannot confront power until you know what it is. And the people running, apparently, and stocking and staffing the Trump administration are basically all Koch certified. You can call it whatever, it's the Koch-Head cabinet. Pretty amazing. We'll be right back.